I am going to go ahead and do this and invite you to look at it in a different way. Not this way, which we've done several times in these classes now. And I need to set this up really quick. So it's upside down. Let's see, here we go. There we are. So what we do here, for the first warm-up drawing, I am going to start with the image upside down. I am going to select a tool, which is this water-soluble ink pen, and I am going to try to really squint my way through. It's not necessarily a upside down blind contour. What I'm really trying to do is capture some of the mapping of the light and the shapes. So you maybe see me going through the folds in the pants, and because of my position, you should know where I am right over here. You know, it's Charlie Chaplin's bottom of the pants here, and there's so many intricate folds and abstract patterns that I want to just 100% blind contour so far. And already it's looking great. So I could pause here very quickly. I know something you shouldn't really do too much, but I want to make sure it's very easy to lose your place. So I'm just going to wash it up with a little bit of water, creating just that quick painterly shift. And see, already I'm beginning to question, is this the right side or is that the opposite side here? Which one is the shadow? There we are. And I'm going to play with this just to get a continuation of the shapes, the sizes. Also, I'm beginning to look at proportion here just a little bit. But most importantly, what I think I really want to render is these beautiful shadow shapes with that nice contrast of light. Not so much the detail. Here I come into the opposite, the second subject here, which would be, and of course I'm not thinking that way, I'm trying to see just the shapes, but I'm right at the hands. And this is what I want to evaluate. Can I recognize some of the imagery now? The shapes that I need to get familiarized with. Don't want to simplify them too much, but I don't want to take too long with this warm-up. Once again, it's basically syncing our eye with our hand, getting ready to make some beautiful mark making. Beginning to see elements and things as shapes, lines and shapes, and light and shadow, instead of the usual way where we get in trouble as eyes or heads or arms or hands. Now remember, these warm-ups, yeah, this is a little boy and it's holding hands with, but in the end, what I want to, even if it looks like a foot, what I want to do is get familiar and loosen up the instrument of mark making, the tool that I'll be using, and I'm a little bit off already here. Let's go ahead and bring this once again, just a little bit. Now, some of these washes, there's a little bit of value that obviously I'm not going to pay too close of attention. Here I'm looking at almost as black and white, although some of them could be just a little lighter gray. I tried doing that here, picking up some material from the opposite side. Some that obviously seem way harsher and darker. I'll try to do a little extra ink. Just like that. And we obviously have more shadows on the area of the coat. But again, I'm not saying that as coat or arm. I'm trying to break down as simple, almost geometric, if you can, those geometric shapes, but all of it almost negative space. Preoccupied with features when you run into them, try not to. And it's also quieting your brain a little bit. We reach areas like the one I am in right now where we recognize there's no denying what we're seeing, even if it's upside down, but you need to take control of how you see and how you transfer the information of what you see. That is the most important, the only reason why this exercise is worthwhile. To understand, how do I control the way I see? How do I use the knowledge I have, valuable knowledge about line, shape, value, so I can pick it out of any subject matter, and bring it together through editing with a good process of observation. How do I make that better each time? So some of these washes, you begin to see it's inevitable. You begin to see and recognize and then you realize also, wow, this blind it was blind, but it wasn't just contour. This was more a reading of negative space, but also the map of light, which is what I call it, the mapping of the light and shadow through washes. Let me go ahead and flip this over. I think, yeah, we do have some features, but I would not want to play with that in this same the same way I approach this drawing. So there we go, and there we have it. From here, I begin to see where and evaluate what kind of... Let's go ahead and flip this one back. There we are. Didn't really understand this upside down. I struggled, and I could see how. And immediately recognize how we have areas where we need to be just a little bit more delicate with our mark making, more minimalistic, more efficient. We're also dealing with beautiful expressions today, but they are so subtle, where you may just have to do a dot and a line for that little face, depending again on the medium that you select. And then I'm going to bring that over as a wash. Trying to capture those big eyes with just a dot for a nostril and just a tiny little hint of light shadow for the lips. Again, the type of precision that we're looking for with the features, it will come down to the efficiency of that mark making we always talk about. And this is something that you may want to, if you do choose something like this, you may want to work it in layers. Now there it is, just water-soluble ink with some wash. And this I would obviously have to take a little bit further. It would have to get a little bit darker. But for that, we would have to wait till it dries. I would get more specific with some of these details. But for a warm-up and a quick study, this was great. Let's go to, I think, just for time, the amount of time I want to put into the actual drawing that I'm going to do today, I'm tempted to do something a little more gestural. So in terms of drawing, I could begin a straight line study, a blocking with pencil, bring in some ink washes, and then finish it up with maybe some watercolor or ink lines in the end to do kind of a little bit further than this. I do like the look, and not as straightforward as the previous portraits, like the Einstein portrait, which was just line. We didn't get to do the washes. So this one I would almost want to start with that. Now, let's see. Starting with just graphite, I'm going to try very loosely to use the warm-up I just did and use some of that drawing technique, which is the blind contour plus the negative space read of the subject, which will also make it a little more gestural. So what do I mean by that? It's going to be a mix of drawing techniques, but most of the approach, and here I have something really interesting happening already, which is going to my center line and then my eye line, and just hinting at it so I can get that nice turn on the head, that tilt. So almost beginning with the armature, really start loose with the biggest, simplest. And also our composition. I want to make sure this may have been a little too centered now. And we don't want to push our little fella here too far to the right. There we are. Just getting a little better sense. Again, this is almost 99%, although it's not a blind contour, a lot of it is happening combining those drawing methods that we've done and played with all along. So yeah, that is very close to the edge here. So, being aware, what would you do? Start over. It's early on, it only took a minute. Maybe my proportion got a little bit oversized. Or maybe it's the placement. The proportion was looking for the size of paper that I chose. I wouldn't want it any smaller. So we will start over and making sure I have just that general idea. Once again, push it just a little bit to the left. And let me do it even simpler, looser. Every step of the way. Some of these will be more important as we see the height of the hat. Doing a lot of squinting. I'm gonna have to do a lot of squinting today if I really want to capture that light shadow and what I'm trying to really maximize in today's drawing, the use of those washes with values and some of these very intricate but abstract shapes. So really making sure you get to that abstract place. And the key there is to use negative space. If you can really break it down and see it just a little bit simpler, almost geometric. Something very interesting here. Slow down just a little bit. Making sure we have the right size, proportion on what I think our focal points will be. So we slow down just a little bit, making sure we have a little bit of extra measurement. But already, composition has been fixed. I think this is much, much better in terms of, and I can begin to see the pose as well. These lines right now are very light, but I think you can begin to see the angles, the placement, the composition, all working out just a little bit better. And for this, I will take a little more time, but not at this moment. Here, I want to keep it simple. We got all these intricate folds and textures, so we will come back to that. And it will make this really, really work, because it is an important element. For the character of our subject here. Once again, I'm going to try to figure out that center line for our portrait and that tiny little tilt of the eye line. And you almost can, just like that, ask simple questions. Do I see the nose full frontal? Do I see one side more than the other? And if you do, what is the angle of that? So I see this nostril just a little larger. I'm just dotting for the measurement of the eyes. Remember, I'm going to be working with ink or watercolor. And putting together our portrait there. I want to revisit just a little, we have a big, almost straight line study here. We need to shape it just a little more, and I'm going to be using a little bit of pace, better pace. Just doing a little bit of construction. Trying to do just a tad of construction, sculpting it out, finding the angles, beginning to find those relationships between elements, but very, very focused on the edges and that negative space. a lot of my drawing, I want it to be more gestural. It's not going to be, in terms of precision or likeness, I want it to be playful. I want it to have more character, I should say. So this is a great example here. We have that 3/4, and it's looking a little bit downward as well, with that bulky side of the mustache. So at some point I should question, wait a minute, but I'm supposed to be doing this with pencil, or am I supposed to be doing it with ink? So I just caught myself ready to continue drawing when in fact what I want to do is begin the ink washes. I think I have plenty of information. Most of it as well is going to be on what areas to preserve white. So we can create those nice contrasting shadows, light and shadows. There we go. So getting just a tiny bit of a better read, and I think I'm going to do that with ink. It would be sort of a waste of time to go into all of this. It's going to look like a map, really, jagged with tons of angles and curves. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with ink. Now, am I going to use this as my medium for water-soluble ink? Can I create just areas of just quick washes? Now, I would have to wait on those. So I'm probably going to use watercolor, or I could also use watered down ink, which may be the best option today, just to keep it black and white. So some of those options, very carefully, you want to make sure you have a good idea. Need 1 second. I'm going to use this palette. It's one of these plastic palettes, and I can actually put water and ink from pure black ink all the way to just clean water, and use that to get a good range of values. Ideally, and it's a good thing to have, you want a dropper. So put some of that water. I'm going to use this here. I'm just going to put some, let's go from here. So a couple drops of water. So I started with 2, 4, 8, 12 drops of water here, and then I'm just going to pour the rest of it here. Lots of water. There we go. And I'm going to touch that with a dot of ink. You'll see what that looks like in a second. So starting here with what will be my blackest black, and with the leftover ink on the brush, I'll start here. That may need more ink, and go from there. When you use ink, you should know that the values it's pretty harsh. So you need to really see it. No matter how much water you add. There it is. I think that may work just fine. It may be too close on some of them. Meaning, from here to here, there may be not too much of a shift. So I'll add a little extra water. Adding more ink will not be a problem. And what I want to do, just again, we're experimenting here. Could have done this with watercolor as well. Let's start with that lightest wash. I'm going to use a watercolor brush. And remember, using this ink paper could be, well, it's really light. So we could use that on the face, on the side, visualizing where I'm going to be using variations of value. I'm going to be waiting on this to hopefully you could see. And I'm just kind of splashing them. Like I said, I want this today to be gestural. Where you want to stay out of the areas of light. So I'm using a little bit for background since it's a little lighter. And this paper, just like Bristol, will give you different reactions. It won't be predictable like watercolor paper. Squinting all the way through, and right now it looks like, what are you doing? We are going to have to wait just a little bit, and I could just a little bit while it dries, or begin to make smaller and smaller shapes of darker value. So once again, we started with biggest, simplest, and now I'm going from lightest to darkest. Not much consideration for background today. I'm just, maybe right here, I'm going to make insinuation to that shadow and light that we have broken right there between them on the ground. And maybe one over here to hint at what's happening with seems like a sidewalk. But there we have it. And now you can see I'm shifting the value just a little bit while it's still wet. So there'll be a little bit of wet on wet. And this could also work. Again, not as line. But more as just washes. And all as I decide to read that general shape of shadow that I could then really enrich with line. So in a way, these washes are just a placeholder. It's going to be sort of a supporting element to maybe thinner, sharper, more expressive washes of darker value as well. Notice that I'm using a brush here that is almost, well, it actually does allow me to simply draw. And I'm beginning to draw some edges and some shapes. Beginning to create a little bit of volume. And a little more, little by little, a little more carefree. Again, treating this just as an experiment. And any of those techniques that you love, such as spattering, lifting, all of them come right into play. Beautiful lights and shadows right here around the neck and the side of the face. So I want to be more careful with those and work them slowly. And some of you, are you saying, well, this is just water, like painting? Well, I want you to get that feeling of drawing light and shadow. Because what I am really, technically, you could say, well, you're painting. But what I am is I'm drawing. If you see this, I'm drawing the shadows, and by avoiding the light areas, I'm also drawing the light. And it's also beginning to show as interesting mark making with the brush as your drawing tool. Now, some of these may begin to show up as layers. And that is a painting technique, but it's also a drawing technique. And every time I do this, whether it's charcoal, graphite, you could do this with any medium. It's the way it just appears magical. It really is like a magic trick. Seeing it, beginning to see it come out of the paper. It's a beautiful technique. It does take some strategizing, some seeing those elements that you need to see and then place them at the right time. Lots of these, there's no going back. There's always a wiggle room to play with. And you may be asking, well, why did you use ink paper? Why didn't you use watercolor paper? Well, that's the added surprise. I know what this does on watercolor paper. Now I'm beginning to see things. Yeah, there's buckling and this may be too dark right there. But you want to maybe see if this surprises me. And that is what happens when water, pigment, in this case ink, and paper are allowed to do something that you're not fully 100% familiar with. I could kind of guess. That's why I'm managing the moisture, the wetness, also the value, the amount of the heaviness of the ink. But hoping for some of that magic. How did you do that kind of stuff? That's beginning to happen here. I'm beginning to reach that stage where you want to be careful. So you want to be more analytical, more studious of the shape, making sure you're seeing it. But you can't see my eyes as I draw. They 99% of the time are on my reference. And I know you know how to do that. Which is what I always say. You need to pick out the information. And how do you pick out the information? Well, you got to go see it. You got to observe it. So if you're not even looking at it, how are you making that decision to choose that specific information? That's when you realize, well, I was making it up. And although you're very creative and imaginative, the reason we pick references is so we have that information that we can then interpret. It's a lot easier when you're seeing it and then making decisions from it than trying to imagine it 100% just from symbolism. It will always be richer. So you can see there's layers happening here already, and I think I gotta get over here. Don't leave them behind too much. The quality of your gesture based on how you begin to see, let's add more, slowly. When you work with a technique like this, you don't want to go too dark too fast. You ideally want to stay as light as possible, as long as possible. That is your motto. You should be thinking that way. Okay, yeah, I know how dark I can get with the ink, so why go there and then have no room beyond that? You want to go as light as possible, as long as possible, without, and that's a matter of efficiency, without having to do it over and over and over. Although it's beautiful when you do that. It really is beautiful when you have the patience to develop something slowly where you could see the steps. Making sure you clean if you are working with ink. Big deal. Knowing when to clean your brush in between, going from from a darker value to a lower value. And that's a mistake I just made here. I was working with much darker values, trying to go to a lesser value and didn't really clean my brush. So this is getting a little too dark too fast. So let's go ahead and lift. Try to pull some light back out of this. That's better. Also, look at that. I get some texture in there. Okay, at some point, maybe you want to use a smaller brush, but this one's working really well so far. And I already have so much working here for me to come in with line, but the contrast would be probably just a little too severe, too sharp. So we want these washes to slowly begin making their way to line. So from big wash to line, what is the gap? What is the level of contrast that you could add between those? While you also consider textures and the timing. Don't forget letting certain things dry the way they're supposed to. Knowing how to manage the brush that you selected to create. And as always, without overcooking it. No need to add more than is necessary. What an amazing way to draw. In a way, you're kind of doing additive, but it's from a point of subtractive. What does that mean? When we draw just adding lines, we build, we construct. It literally is that. From foundation, up and up and up until just the final details. You make very specific choices based on like the end. But here you're almost working from the very beginning, having to deal with the end, seeing the end. Which forces you to really consider every decision at every moment within different stages, to be very aware. Just getting a little more loose. Remember, we always talk about looseness. Adding a little bit to that background. At some point, you don't want, depending on the paper you're using, for this to get too heavy with moisture. And I'm reaching a point where, okay, I gotta really wait till this dries just enough for me to make my next mark. So we will wait. Let's go over here. And from here, I should continue just as light as possible. What you do is you see, and you can actually see the layers, the peeling of layers of clothing here. But one mistake that happens is you try to go back to making something that could be so simple as abstract. You complicate it. Stay with the shapes. Stay with abstract shapes. The most important thing that I'm looking at right now is shapes and the value of those shapes right here. It could be anything. I know it's clothing, so texture, I keep it in consideration, but it's about the shapes and the value of those shapes. Those are the things that are going to make this work. And the better I can do, the better job I can do at capturing and mimicking the volume through not just all the shapes, but the ones that really become essential. And that's where your experience is absolutely important. The most important thing, really. And what is that? Experience of how to use elements of contrast. Well, we have the element of value. So I'm contrasting. I'm using that to contrast and do juxtaposition. So what's going forward? What's going backwards? Where's the light coming from? But also we want to kind of construct, do a little building of small and big shapes. I mentioned I will be coming back with ink lines. So I know that's going to be the sharpest, strongest. Also maybe the darkest. And I can push that contrast. So managing these lighter, broader, blurrier. Washes, values, gestures. we can intensify, we can enrich the image. It's looking great, actually. I mean, breaking those shapes down even simpler. Well, what I mean to say is I'm really having fun with this. That is a great thing. That's what it's all about. It's a great practice using a method that you may not be used to. And that is as far as I'm going to push. Some of these values, the pencil mark, are going to be darker than the actual ink I'm dropping in there. I'm going to make that just a little bit friendlier here, not too dark. We have some beautiful light on those lips. And again, making sure some of these areas are dry enough for you to manage those layers the way you're supposed to. Continue adding the proper variation of value in different areas. And really understanding how everything is working in relationship to light. Let's go back up here. Adding a little more water, so I'm getting a little more cautious with some of these values as they get sharper and darker. I'm going to want to test first. There we go. And this is testing according to what's there already. And remember, that sense of looseness. When you begin to paint, remind yourself, no, keep drawing. Create more roundness with some of these value changes here. And it is a great goal to work your way through something like this almost exclusively thinking as abstract as possible. I think this is set up for something really nice now with some of those lines. I want to make sure I have everything I need here. Some of those washes could be really beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my brush to a very, very small brush. When you use ink, I just should mention this, and you don't have specific ink brushes, you want to make sure you clean them as best as possible. Ink will ruin your brush. So make sure you don't use expensive brushes with ink. I do have some that they do just fine, but you definitely want to clean them before and right after. So again, with the very low value, bringing up the value, I'm going to work some of these areas. And again, I'm drawing What I'm trying to do here is draw. The difference is going to be, I wouldn't know how to explain it. When does it stop being drawing and it becomes painting? It's almost like a philosophical matter. But in my head, I am drawing. I'm drawing with a brush. I'm paying attention to a value, specific value, making that just. As gradual as possible. But in that process, not losing sight. Again, it's really difficult to stay focused on the way you've done so far, especially when you get to these features. And obviously, well, what do I do about the expression? Well, that's when you really have to make a conscious choice of what am I looking for, forgetting that it's an eye, and really capturing the shape and the value that is in front of you, almost forgetting completely about what it is, or what you think it is, I should say. Because no matter what, and as you should know, just any shift in the pose makes an eye something else completely from 1 second to the next. And if you've ever drawn from life, someone posing there for you, you know exactly what I mean. If they move not even just breathe sometimes, everything changes. So what are you looking for? Are you looking at the eye, or are you looking at what's presented in terms of line, shape, value? How you identify those elements. How you need to break them down. Gradually adding a little more value, just a bit at a time. Keeping it gestural. I have to bring extra values now as I get a little darker. And make sure I have nice transitions from the early ones to these later ones. I feel this one got just a little bit away from me, too dark, too fast. Forcing me to maybe lighten it, which is too late now, or darken the next one. There we go. But I gotta tell you, this right here, working way better, even better than what I usually do with watercolor paper. Really letting the materials do the work. The water, the pigment, the paper, doing some beautiful, beautiful things I hardly ever see that I wish I could do when working with watercolor on watercolor paper. This is a good goal to have. And I'll show you close-ups as it dries a little more. But it is beautiful. So sometimes realizing it's more about that cosmic almost aliveness of those elements than you being precise and controlled is what really makes a work of art stand out. You cannot help but think it's a great thing. It's almost a superpower to let go. And maybe that's what we're doing here. We're just practicing on how to let go, little by little. But no, I want my eye to look this way, and see, we're even using the word of the thing that you're not supposed to even be thinking about. But a good way to think about it is that you're training yourself to be more efficient at letting go of control, while being in control, which is a beautiful thing. And again, I catch myself losing that looseness, losing the looseness. Can I bring it right back? The state of mind. In that state of mind, how do I keep that looseness? How can I keep thinking or not thinking about it, but keeping it active? I think this is dry enough. I've been waiting for certain areas to dry just a little bit. Trying to draw this expression here. Keeping it loose. Okay, really got carried away on that little face. See, there's that control thing. I try to stay loose. I'm happy with it. Happy with some of the results. Bringing just a little more contrast with a little extra layer. At some of these darkest. Again, when you squint and you spot the contrast like you're supposed to, just go for it. Trust it. Beautiful, beautiful gesture coming through. Getting to play with brushwork and textures, but also that beautiful light. It's an excellent image to be able to work with. These transitions from harsh light to not such harsh shadows. Yes, they're there, here and there. There we go. The other thing about ink, it almost dries too fast for you to make decisions that, if not confident, will make you pay. All right, that's it. You are done. That point of overcooking, before we reach it, let's stop there. So this is what's happening with these washes there. And you notice how everything is kind of drawn, but because it's not line, I'm drawing with washes, and you could see the layers. And they're playing with each other. And again, this paper allowed me to do, or did so many beautiful things, repelling and absorbing the ink, the water, that you almost have everything you would want. Where would I add lines to this right here? And bringing that over to what I was talking about earlier. Look at these beautiful things that happened here with the water and the ink. It would be the same with watercolor and layering, pure abstraction, just shifting values, but beautiful, simple blooming and cosmic type techniques of medium just doing what it does best. Look at the abstract shapes that are happening here. Again, if I go closer, you could see how it's just almost one value. I really made the mustache a little too dark too fast, but everything else you could read as light grays, and there is no white except for a few spots on that face, which I will save. But up here, same thing. Nothing but pure abstract reading of light and shadow, and jiggly. Very, again, gestural was the goal, drawn, playful. And that's what it comes together like. Quick. Some of them got a little too harsh there, but I still think it works. And I'm going to try to do the same approach that I did here. And it's not much, honestly. It's going to be very careful darkening of the value. A little more drawing. Almost wanting to push it back so I could do just a few extra layers here and there. Of extra gray. And we've been talking about this. You're experts at it now. You hear me say it every single time. The key ingredient that seems to be patience. No matter your pace. It could be fast pace, slow pace, but the patience to translate the intention, what you see, your skill of observation, and the patience to deliver. as one of the key ingredients. So I'm being very patient there. And look at that expression coming along. I went a little bit lighter, knowing I could come back just a little bit patient with one extra layer. And drawing those beautiful shapes. Adding more layers. Yes, drawing to painting here and there. Bringing in a little bit of anatomy knowledge to this area here, knowing that concave, convex, planes of the face, so we can manage a little bit better contour and light. But very minimal, very simple lines here and there. Most of us would want to add heavy, almost outline, defining lines to some of these characteristics. You have to do the opposite. You want to build it slowly. Continue drawing, even though you want to paint. Every now and then, remind yourself to squint once again. Squint at it once again. Make sure you're seeing what you need to see, how it is, the actuality of it, according to value, because we can forget and just make up information. And the way these hands came together, I just got to tell you, I didn't do that. That's the magic of it. I got to tell you, it's the intuition, knowing how to lay down the proper value. That's what it was. With an efficient brushstroke. Very efficient, very minimal. I'm beginning to pick up values from other areas and being very, very conscious of not overcooking anything here. Just shifting some edges. And now really just on the lookout for finishing touches here. Now my finishing touches are not going to be harsh. They're a few levels away from pure ink. I actually haven't used the 100% pure ink. This one's getting a little close there. Just a punch a little bit, adding more water to it. But very carefully, as everything begins to dry, it gives me this just much richer and very quick response, where I could see some of that edge. And again, if it's working, why mess with it? I'm going to leave that alone. Just creating that final edge right over here, where we have that nice opposite on the negative space, the edge, so we can see the neck and the shoulder, but it's not going to be so obvious. Wanting to put almost some of that brick texture back there, break up the line. And the only thing I can add to this is a ta-da, leave it alone, say it's done. So the original idea of washes and finishing up with ink lines is completely, can't do it. I would not see where to add ink lines that would not completely change the look of this piece. I love the way this paper, almost like Bristol, surprising. The response to some of the washes, also the ease to draw with the brush because of the smoothness of the paper. So at this point, yeah, I would pause. Here's where I would stop. Give it a good look. Little time, little space, and maybe if needed, just do some highlight finishing ink lines with an ink pen. That would just bring it to a close. But there we have it. I hope you enjoyed it.